Hey juniors, today we're going to continue with the Revolutionary War. So in the top right hand corner of your notes page, go ahead and write today's date, which is 8/11/2014. As usual, feel free to pause the video at any moment to get the notes that you need written down in your notebook. Our essential question for the day is, what is the Second Continental Congress and the Battle of Bunker Hill? The essential question does need to be written down in your notes page, so make sure you pause the video and get a chance to write this down. You should also notice something different about this slide. This text is in bold, it's underlined, and it's in gold. From now on, everything that you have to write down from these videos will be in gold, as well as being bolded and underlined. So let's review from last week. We know that the colonists were preparing for war with the British. To prepare for war, they began to stockpile weapons at Concord. The British find out that the colonists have started to collect weapons and decide to seize the weapons. Paul Revere finds out about this and rides through the night warning colonists that the British were coming to seize the weapons. The result is that the colonists and the British have their first battles at Lexington and Concord. The British win at Lexington but lose at Concord. And as we know, this kickstarts the Revolutionary War. After the battles of Lexington and Concord, the British responded to colonist rebellion by simply ignoring them. King George, to this point, had ignored all colonist attempts at settlement. The colonists decided to gather for one last attempt at settling their differences with the British. Keep in mind, the colonists did not necessarily want war. It's always better to settle differences without physical violence, and the colonists did not have the money or the materials to pull off a revolution. However, with King George ignoring the colonists' attempts at settling differences, they did not have a choice. And you notice this first bullet point is bolded, underlined, and in gold, so it does need to be in your notes page. So I just said in the previous slide that the colonists decided to gather for one last attempt at convincing the British to settle differences. And that occurred at what was known as the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress did three important things. The first thing is that it created the Continental Army. The second was that it named George Washington the main general. And of course, George Washington, shown in this photo, would later become our first president. The Continental Army would serve as the militia for the colonists, and that's what it was called, the Continental Army. The last thing that the Second Continental Congress did was that it sent the Olive Branch Petition to King George, which was a last attempt to restore harmony between the colonies and Britain. However, King George refused to even read it, and so the war continued on. As you can see, these first two bullet points are in gold, so you do need to write them down in your notes page. So we said earlier that the first two battles of the Revolutionary War were at Lexington and Concord. The next major battle was the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill was fought just a few miles away from Boston. The colonists were outnumbered 1,600 militia to 2,400 British soldiers. However, despite the fact that the colonists were outnumbered, they forced the British to retreat 3 times. The colonists would eventually lose the battle, but it gives them the belief that they can beat the British, which becomes invaluable to them as they continue with the Revolutionary War. As you know, whenever you have the will to really do something and the belief that you can do it, it makes you that much stronger. And that's exactly what happened with the colonists. The lasting effects of the Battle of Bunker Hill were as follows. The colonists had an untrained military that had very little experience. However, since they competed so well with Britain's powerful army, which at this time was the world's most powerful army, it gave them hope that they could win the war. However, it's important to acknowledge that this is not a war that the colonists should have won. But obviously, they did win, or we would not be here today in our country that we call America. That's going to be it for Intro to New Material today, guys. Thanks for listening. We're going to move into our guided and independent practice now.